All right. Well, good morning, everybody, or good morning if you're in my time zone anyway, here in Singapore or somewhere in East Asia. I'm William Thomas, and we're going to get started here in just a moment. We've got some people still logging in, and I want to give them just a few seconds. And this is a good opportunity to check your volume, make sure that it's okay, make sure you're not blasting out your colleagues in the cubicles next to you. All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let's dive in. And hello, John, it's good to see you here. All right, good to see all of you. Thank you very much for joining the session today. I'm happy that you're able to be with us as we talk about ways to minimize uncertainty in your workplace, or as we like to call it, taking the U out of VUCA. I'm Dr. William Thomas. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a leadership coach with Designing Leaders, based here in Singapore, but working throughout Asia. And we run a new webinar every month, and I appreciate your interest in today's topic. So for our session today, we're first going to touch on some fundamental points about uncertainty, just to make sure that we're all starting with the same understanding of this topic. And then we're going to explore some ways to reduce uncertainty in our organizations. The webinar will last for 45 minutes with about 35 minutes of content, followed by some time for questions. You will notice a chat box on your screen there, and you can send me a question or a comment at any time using that. You can send it publicly to everyone or just privately to me as the admin, whatever you prefer. I may also have some questions for you as we go along. I may put up a poll, just take a poll of the attendees, or ask you for some ideas that you can share in the chat box as well. This webinar is being recorded, and a replay will be available online if you want to review anything later or share the replay with somebody else. So, uncertainty. The impact of uncertainty on our organizations does not simply come about because of an unexpected external event, such as a pandemic or a financial crisis or a trade war. Uncertainty is a regular part of our working environment, and while it may increase or decrease as different events happen, its impact will always be felt unless we take steps to do something about it. Uncertainty is one element of what we call the VUCA environment. And as I've used that term VUCA in different workshops over the last few years, I've realized that not everybody is familiar with it. So before we focus in on uncertainty, let me make sure that we all understand the bigger concept that we're talking about today. The word VUCA is an acronym. It includes 4 factors that help to describe today's business environment. First of all, business is volatile. Our businesses are affected by frequent, rapid, and significant change. We often think of this in terms of technology change, and that certainly is important. But other examples of volatility include government politics, such as an announcement of tariffs by the US against China that creates some dramatic change, or the emergence of a new competitor. There's always great change going on in our business, and it's not just coming from technology. A second element of VUCA is uncertainty, and that's something we're going to come back to in just a moment and then focus on for the rest of our time. We work in an environment of complex relationships driven by increasing globalization. If you think about this externally, consider the impact of global supply chains on manufacturing and what happens when those supply chains are disrupted. But even within a company, we often have complex relationships with the rise of virtual teams, with teammates in multiple countries, with solid line and dotted line relationships, with full-time employees and contract employees and gig workers. Nothing simple anymore, it seems. Finally, the nature of our work is often ambiguous in that it is hard to define exactly what we do. It's hard to define who our competition is. It may even be hard to define success. Take Apple, for instance. What does Apple do? Are they a computer manufacturer? Yes. Are they a software developer? Yes. Are they a content provider? Yes, through Apple Music and Apple TV. Are they a financial services company? Yes, they are, through Apple Pay. It's harder and harder to define our mission and our standard for success. So where did this term come from? Well, the common belief is that the term VUCA was created by the US military to describe the global environment after the Cold War. The truth is, it was first used by a couple of business professors in the late 1980s, but it did become more common once it was used to describe the military environment. And during my 21 years as an officer in the United States Air Force, I spent a lot of time creating strategies and plans for how we would operate in this new world. I also had the opportunity to go to some places, as you can see here, and just see how well those strategies and plans were going to work. And I can tell you that it was a lot harder to deal with the VUCA world with all the different threats than it had been to deal with the Cold War world where there was just one big threat. We had a lot of trouble adapting to this world, the military did, and I would like to help you avoid some of the problems that we had. Now, during the last 3 decades, I've spent a lot of time dealing with these challenges, the challenges of the VUCA world, and I realized that the one element over which we have the most control is uncertainty. So let's turn to that. Uncertainty comes about when people have to deal with unexpected events. It comes about any time people are unsure what is expected of them, what rules they're supposed to follow, or even how they're being evaluated. When people feel like they don't know what's going to happen in the future, it affects their ability to perform well in the present. Now, certainly an unexpected external event, such as a public health emergency or a natural disaster or ongoing demonstrations and civil unrest in a city, that can create a lot of uncertainty. Companies often try to address this, such as by having a business continuity plan to deal with a crisis. But a lot of our uncertainty comes from internal processes and from the way our leaders lead, and we don't spend nearly enough time trying to deal with that. So our discussion today is going to consider threats from and responses to all kinds of uncertainty, regardless of what's causing it. Now, before we move on from this introduction to the VUCA concept, I would like to get a sense from you of how these factors affect your organization. So I'm going to put up a poll, and I would like to get a sense of which of these factors you think has the biggest impact on you. Which of these VUCA factors do you think has the biggest impact on your organization? All right, seeing some answers pop up there. And so far, nobody is taking the last choice, saying that we're not affected by any of them. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and close that out here. And it looks like about 2/3 of you said that uncertainty is the factor that has the biggest impact on your organization. Now, of course, that's not a very scientific poll, I guess, because one of the reasons you joined this session today is because uncertainty creates some challenges for you. So that's good to know that you've got some interest in this. So let's take a look at where we're going for the rest of our time together today. First of all, we're going to look at sources of uncertainty. Now, I mention this because I want you to look around your organization and see which of these might exist for you. And that way, if you know that there's potential for trouble, you can try to fix it beforehand rather than responding after there's a problem. Then we'll talk for a moment about how uncertainty can affect your organization. Why does this matter? And this is useful because if you know what symptoms to look for, you can figure out when and how you need to intervene to try to reduce uncertainty that is creating problems for you. Finally, the bulk of our time will be on what you can do about it. Now, this is where I hope you'll get the real return on investment of your 45 minutes today. I want to offer you some steps that you can take to improve your business performance. I'm going to focus on 4 techniques in particular, and you can see them listed here. Now, all of these, you will notice, have to do with communicating, because frankly, being a good communicator is one of the most important skills a leader can have. And I will dive down into each of these in just a bit. But first, I want to take a quick look at the sources of uncertainty. Now, as we have seen, external challenges such as a global pandemic or a trade war can create a lot of uncertainty. But fortunately for us, those events are few and far between. But there are plenty of other things that happen within our organization that contribute to uncertainty, such as major changes. And every time there's a major change in the organization, such as mergers and acquisitions, rebranding, the launching of a new line of products, such as when Apple got into the business of selling smartphones, people start to wonder what the core purpose of the organization is, and they wonder what the priorities are. We're seeing this now a lot as companies are talking about a digital transformation, and a lot of employees are left wondering how that is going to impact them. Similarly, anytime we reorganize our internal structure, people are unsure how that's going to affect the job they do, and they may be worried that they won't even have a job. And when I've taught workshops before on change management, one of the biggest concerns I hear from people is wondering if their jobs are about to go away. So when we reorganize, people are often left unsure about what they're supposed to do and how these changes are going to affect their future. The social culture in which you operate can affect the amount of uncertainty in your organization. For example, if communication is limited, like maybe leaders don't feel they need to explain things to their juniors, maybe employees are afraid to ask questions or disagree with their bosses, maybe nobody wants to tell a client, we can't do that, then people are left wondering about why certain things are happening. And they may end up with unrealistic expectations because they don't have accurate information. So consider how your social culture and your organizational culture might be creating more uncertainty. Of course, every time somebody new comes into a leadership position, everybody wonders what's going to change. What is this new person going to bring, and what are they going to expect? And the longer that people have to wonder about that, the more their uncertainty increases. One of the most common sources of uncertainty in any organization is all of the policies and the processes that people do not understand. And we'll talk about this a bit more later, but the key thing to remember is that when people are not sure of how to do things, they either do them wrong or they just don't do them. And one thing for you to consider as a leader is that just because you understand how something works or you understand why we do things the way we do them, don't assume that everyone understands that, because it's often not the case. Finally, one thing that gets a lot of people concerned is their future career. Not knowing what a possible career path looks like can leave people unsure about what they should do to advance their career, and even wonder if they should stay at the organization or go someplace else where they might have a better future. So, how do you know if these sources of uncertainty are creating a problem for you? Well, the thing to do is look for the negative effects. What are the symptoms of a problem that we should be watching for? This is really the big question. Why does this matter? And what's going to happen if I don't deal with this? So the most natural response when people don't know what to do is to stop. They just stop. And your organization can slow down, because when people don't know if something they do is going to matter, it's pretty common to just not do it or to wait and see what's going to happen. And they may hesitate to take actions because they don't want to take the wrong action and then look bad or maybe get into trouble. So for a lot of people, the easiest decision is to make no decision. When people are uncertain about what's going on, they spend more time trying to get clarification rather than doing their actual work. They come knocking on your door, they're whispering in the pantry, they're spending a lot of time in a WhatsApp group or a WeChat group rather than getting their work done. Uncertainty slows things down because people are trying to find answers, and thus it reduces engagement level as everybody's frustration levels rise. Innovation often stops because people hesitate to propose new ideas when they're not sure what is expected of them. Maybe they don't know if they're allowed to even introduce new ideas or to work with other people. When people don't know what the organization plans for the future, they have a hard time contributing new ideas towards that future. Now, when your client-facing employees are getting confused and when they don't know what's happening, then your clients don't know what's happening. And when clients are uncertain about your ability to provide a product or a service in the future, they may look for a more stable source. They may go to one of your competitors. This has been an especially big problem for companies that are rebranding or that are going through a change in ownership, such as through a merger or an acquisition. Finally, when your employees feel uncertain about their future with you, or if they feel disengaged from their work because they aren't really sure what work they're supposed to be doing, their easiest solution is often to leave you. People will naturally leave an uncertain environment for something more stable, and that is especially true as they take on more personal responsibilities later in life, such as caring for a family. That means you don't just risk losing people and incurring the cost of turnover, you especially risk losing your more senior people who take a lot of corporate knowledge with them when they leave. Now, these are some of the bad things that can happen to you, and these are some of the symptoms you should be watching for. If you see some of these specific issues happening, a slowdown in performance, people no longer sharing ideas or hesitating to speak up, clients or employees who are leaving you, start asking yourself if you have an uncertainty problem and be ready to take some corrective steps. So, what are these corrective steps? Well, I have 4 practices that I want to share with you today. And what's useful about these particular techniques is that they can help you across a whole range of situations. So if you have a major external event, such as a public health crisis or civil unrest in one of your markets, these techniques can certainly help calm people down and make sure that the information keeps flowing. But these practices will also help you with the normal day-to-day sources of uncertainty that exist, even when the world at large seems to be going smoothly. The first useful technique for minimizing uncertainty involves setting clear expectations about your employees' jobs. Now, we often think that we do this by writing a job description and setting some annual KPIs and setting other metrics for our employees. But I want you to consider a couple of things about that. First, think about how we use job descriptions. How accurate are they really? I mean, really, how accurately do we make our job descriptions? JDs often describe the basics in very general terms, but there is often a lot left unsaid about the work that people will do. The JD should not just describe what an employee is supposed to accomplish, it also should discuss how they will accomplish it. Are they expected to develop new ideas or just follow the status quo and color inside the lines? Should they plan to work individually, or should they expect to be more collaborative? And if they are supposed to work with others, what kinds of relationships and networks do they need in order to get their job done? And for that matter, does the job description get updated when there are changes to the role? Here's something I'd like you to do after this session, and I mean as soon as we hang up after the webinar. I want you to take a look at your own job description and ask yourself, is this really what I do? If not, I encourage you to rewrite it to reflect reality and then talk it over with your manager to make sure that you both agree on what your job is. Next, if you have people working for you, pull up the job descriptions of all of your direct reports and ask yourself, is that what I expect them to do? If not, then they are likely to be confused about exactly what you want because the JD says one thing, but you keep asking for something else. And it would be a good idea to sit down with them to clear up any confusion and rewrite the job description so that it's accurate. Next, consider when you should be clarifying the role and setting expectations for your employees. For new hires, we often think that starts with the onboarding process and setting some initial KPIs. I have found, though, that companies get the best performance from their new employees if they start setting expectations during the recruiting process, such as during the interview, where maybe you explain more about the job rather than just spending the whole time asking questions. For that matter, even the way you write the job announcement can help to set expectations. Let people know up front what the job involves. If you do that, you're more likely to attract people who actually want to do that kind of work, but you'll find that they also become good at it more quickly because they know right away what's expected of them. But setting expectations is more than just KPIs and job descriptions. You should also make sure that your employees understand the expectations in the working environment. Basically, how do things work here? So discuss with them any policies, both formal and informal, official and unofficial, that guide their work. Do they have some flexibility in their working hours, or do they have to start at a fixed time and end at a fixed time? Are they expected to take calls at night or work on the weekends? If they travel for work, how do they get reimbursed for their expenses? If they're working from home, how available do they need to be for calls and online meetings, and how much should they plan to work individually? You won't necessarily get into all of this in the job interview, of course, but your employees need to learn all of this early on so that they can be their most productive most quickly. You also need to set reasonable career expectations for your team. And I'm not saying you should make promises about what people are going to get promoted into, but instead let them know what's possible and what it takes to achieve that. A few years ago, I was working with an organization here in Singapore, a government agency that was losing a lot of its fresh graduates after less than 2 years on the job. And they thought it was because all these millennials were disappointed that they weren't getting promoted quickly. What they found, though, in their exit interviews was that people didn't so much want to get promoted quickly. They just wanted some idea of what the career path was. And they didn't know. And when they didn't know, they went somewhere else where they had a little more visibility on what a career could look like. So be open with your people about their career options. Now, as important as it is to set expectations, it's also important to reset expectations when things change. In this volatile world in which we live, your responsibilities today and your responsibilities a year from now could be very, very different, even if you have the same job title. And if you have new expectations of people, you need to make sure that they know about them. Now, as you set expectations about what people are responsible for, make sure they also know what authority they have. How many times have you faced a situation where everybody sits around waiting for a decision because nobody knows who's supposed to make that decision? Or how many times have your employees come to you to get you to solve a problem that you think they should be able to solve? These are signs that you need to set some boundaries. You need to let people know what decisions are within their authority and which decisions are not. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I was working with a resort hotel chain, a global hotel chain. And a general manager at a property in the Middle East told me that he was tired of getting called at home in the middle of the night by the front desk to settle a problem with an unhappy guest. So what he did was he gave the front desk staff the authority to solve a guest's problem, to deal with a guest through any method up to a cost of $150 US. Now, that could be a room upgrade, it could be vouchers for the restaurants, it could be a limo to the airport, whatever it took to keep the guest happy. They didn't need to call for permission, they just needed to do it, solve the problem, and then report it the next day. The front desk staff was happy with this because now they knew what they could do and they were able to solve problems quickly. The guest was happy because problems were getting addressed, and the general manager was happy because now he got to sleep through the night. So it's a win-win-win, which is even better than a win-win. So that proved to be very helpful. People are more likely to make decisions and take initiative when they know that it's okay to make decisions and take initiative. And it helps if you make that explicit. Don't just say we expect people to be problem solvers without letting people know what resources are available to help them solve their problems or what authority they have to solve their problems. For example, if you have people working from home, let them know that it's okay for them to take some time in the morning to take care of their kids and then catch up on work in the evening. You know, they may be wondering about that. It would help if you could make it explicit. And don't worry that by setting boundaries, you're going to limit people's thinking, that you're going to be putting limitations on them that will limit their thinking. There are always limitations on our actions. And you'll find that people work a lot better and a lot more confidently when it's very clear to them what those limits are. One of the things I've noticed in the last 8 years of working in different countries around Asia is that there are a lot of people who, for various reasons, hesitate to make decisions and take actions on their own, especially when they're junior in the organization. And folks, that just slows everything down. So consider how you can make it very clear to people how much authority they have so that they know their boundaries and they can find the best solution within those boundaries. Now, of course, everything we're talking about here involves communication. Communication is only helpful if you're actually open and transparent about what's going on in the organization. You need to be open in your communication. So that's the third thing I want to talk about, is this idea of transparency. Don't hold back information unless you absolutely have to. Be transparent with your people. One of the most effective methods of improving both employee engagement and performance has been to help employees see how their work contributes to the company's overall goals. So make sure that they understand the big picture so then they can figure out how their little picture fits in. Your employees will feel more confident that they are doing the right things when they know what the right things are. And they're also more likely to offer suggestions for improvement if they understand what the ultimate objective is. Now, this openness is important during normal times, during normal day-to-day work, but it is absolutely critical when you have a big change underway, such as a reorganization or a merger or a rebranding, or when you face an external problem, such as a pandemic or weekly protests in a city that disrupt your business. When people know that things are changing, when people know that something's going on, but they don't know what the ultimate outcome is supposed to be, they get very confused about what actions to take. They also have trouble explaining things to others, like your clients and your customers, who may have questions of their own about what you're doing. When something bad happens, whether it's a problem in the company or something from the outside, be transparent about what you know, but also be honest about what you don't know. And if you do that, that will help people feel like they're getting all the available information, and they'll quit wondering what they're not being told if they know that you're telling them everything you can. For a lot of managers, they may feel like they don't need to explain things to people. When I was in the military, I heard so many senior officers say, just do what I tell you. I don't need to explain it. Okay. Fair enough. Maybe you're not required to, but you will find that if you take some time to explain why you want people to do something and what the ultimate outcome is supposed to be and why it matters, if you take that time in the beginning, they'll do a better job. And frankly, that's your objective as a leader, is to help your people do their best job. So the more open you are about what you're trying to do and what's needed to make all of that happen, the more confident your people will be about taking actions, and the more likely they are to take the right ones. But it's not enough just for you to be transparent with your employees. They also need to speak openly with you and with each other. So creating a culture of open communication is very, very important. First of all, and I'd say most importantly, they need to feel like it's okay to ask questions. They need to be able to ask why we're doing this, or ask you for clarification on anything that they're uncertain about. Nobody should ever walk out of a meeting, turn to a colleague and ask, so did you understand what they were talking about? The time to ask questions is during the conversation. Next, they need to feel like they can offer suggestions. They need to be able to disagree with others, even somebody senior to them, and offer an alternative if they feel that there's a better way to do something. Years ago, I was teaching in a master's degree program at a university here in Singapore. And one of my students told me that when he arrived at a new job at a government agency, he was told, your job is to sit against the wall in meetings for 20 years until it's your turn to talk. Folks, you cannot afford that. You cannot afford to have smart people sitting there silently. They need to feel comfortable speaking up. Third, people need to communicate across the organization. That means asking questions and sharing information with people in other functions or in other markets. And if they can talk with these other people and they do so regularly, they'll have a better idea of what's going on around the company, and they don't have to wonder about it. Finally, your client-facing employees need to be open with your clients and your customers. If there are changes going on in the company, They need to be as open as they can about that so your customers are not confused by what you're doing. Along the same lines, if your customers are asking for things that you cannot do, that your company doesn't do or doesn't provide, your salespeople need to be honest about that and offer alternatives rather than promising something but then not delivering on it, because that's just going to confuse everybody. People don't like to tell customers no. I mean, I get that. I don't like to tell customers no, but they could instead learn to say no, but, and offer an alternative. Now, something we often experience is that many people hesitate to speak up even when we want them to. And in some cultures, junior people may feel like it's not their place to speak up. Maybe they don't want to ask questions because they're afraid of looking dumb. Maybe they don't want to make the boss look bad by asking the boss a question or by disagreeing. Maybe they feel that their language skills are not good enough, so they don't say anything. And I've had people tell me that that's why they don't speak up. Whatever the reason is, you cannot afford to have people sitting quietly by with unanswered questions or with good ideas that they keep to themselves. I saw this with a client in Vietnam last year, a manufacturing company where the leaders desperately wanted ideas from their people because they were undergoing some major changes, adding a whole new production line. But their employees were afraid to speak up. So what we realized is it's often not enough to just tell people you want them to communicate. You need to take some actions to show them that you really mean it. So consider trying a couple of things. First of all, try asking open-ended questions rather than just yes/no questions. Ask questions that require some explanation. So if you're talking with an employee, don't ask them, do you agree with this plan? Instead, ask them something like, why do you think this plan will work? Or how do you think this plan could be improved? It forces them to give more of an explanation rather than just nodding their head. Also, when you're in a meeting and you're soliciting ideas from a group of people, start with the most junior person in the room. That way, they can't just agree with senior people, but instead they can provide some real insights that they truly believe instead of just trying to go along with the crowd, okay? So start with the most junior people. If you're soliciting ideas, if you're soliciting suggestions, maybe try and make those suggestions anonymous. If people don't want to be seen as, overeager, for example, or they're afraid that their idea might not sound that good, make them anonymous. If people are hiding their thoughts from you, make it impossible for them to do so, okay? Change the rules of the game. Change the rules of the conversation. Now, all of these techniques are based on communication, but remember, if it's just managers telling employees things, that's not really communication. True communication happens only when it's two-way, and your employees need to feel that they can speak up so that anything they're confused about can get cleared up quickly. These 4 practices have proven to be very helpful in minimizing the amount of uncertainty that employees face. And companies that engage in this kind of communication between leaders and their employees tend to see improved performance, more innovation, higher levels of employee engagement, and greater retention of both employees and clients. I'd like to get an idea of which of these you think could have the biggest impact for your organization, and I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment. Something else to keep in mind is that if you communicate like this all the time, normally day to day, then when a bad situation comes up or when a major change happens, people will trust their leaders more and they will be more confident that they're getting all the information they can, because that's how it happens day to day. By incorporating these techniques into your regular working style, you will reduce uncertainty during the big events by reducing uncertainty as part of the normal operation. From my own experiences in the military, I know that once our organizational culture changed, once it evolved into one that included open communication, that was huge for us. Once we got away from the top-down communication and towards more collaborative communication, that really helped. That had the biggest impact, I think, on our operations. And so I would like to get a sense of which of these you think would have the biggest impact on your operations. Which of these techniques do you think could have the biggest impact on reducing uncertainty in your company? I'll give you a few seconds to take a look at that. All right. A lot of answers still coming in. Okay. This is very interesting. All right. Okay. Let me give it a couple more seconds here. Still getting some answers. Okay. Well, this is very interesting to see. All right. So it looks like facilitating open communication, which was taking the lead through most of this as I was watching, is tied up there with setting expectations. So that's interesting to see. And that also gives me some ideas then for what our upcoming webinars will be about. We'll probably try and focus on those two. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your ideas there. All right. So in a moment, we've got about 9 minutes left. In a moment, I'm going to take your questions. And in fact, you could start typing those into the chat box now if you want to. And then I'll see those and I'll be able to address those. But while you're doing that, while you're typing in some questions, and I've actually gotten a couple already, I want to share with you some ideas for some things you could do right away. Whenever we do a session like this, you may be thinking about things that you want to do differently. And then unfortunately, once the webinar is over, you go back to your inbox and you focus on that, and all those great ideas never happen. So let me suggest some steps that you could take that would help you actually get the benefits from being part of this event today. I know I already suggested you go take a look at your JDs, but here are some other things you could do starting maybe even just this afternoon or tomorrow. First, review the processes and the operations in your company and look for possible sources of uncertainty. Are there things that maybe you understand that other people might not? Then start looking for signs of uncertainty. Check for some of those symptoms that we talked about earlier. Is performance down? Do you have retention problems? Are customers leaving? And then once you see where the uncertainty exists, try to diagnose the reason for that. Figure out what information is missing or what's causing the confusion. And once you have an idea of what's causing it, then try to identify some solutions. Figure out how to address the information gaps or the lack of confidence or the poor communication that is hurting your performance. And finally, whatever you decide could be helpful, please follow through and actually implement it. A good idea does not do you a lot of good if you never step up and make a change. Now, don't wait around on this, okay? Please, maybe start this process later today. If you wait till tomorrow, there's a good chance you'll keep pushing it off. Try working on it later today so you can start putting some of these ideas to good use rather than just waiting and forgetting about it. Okay, so that's all of the material that I've got for today. We've got a few minutes left for questions, and I've got some that have been coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and take those now, and you can still send some more in the chat box. I do want to point out a couple things real quickly. First, after the event today, you're going to get an email with a link to the replay of this webinar in case you'd like to go back and review it again or send it to somebody else. Hopefully that'll be useful for you. There will also be in that email a link to a short feedback survey. Now, we do pay attention to your feedback. We've made some changes in this session today based on feedback from last month's webinar. So I do encourage you to provide that feedback. If you're interested in learning more about how our coaching and training services can help you develop your leaders, you can visit our website, which is listed there. You can also reply to any of the emails you receive about this webinar, and that will get forwarded back to me. So let me take a look at the questions that we've got coming in here. So in the space of innovation, when they're always changing, when things are always changing, uncertainty seems to be a constant. Boy, that's true. What do you think are the overarching principles that could help? There are two elements to innovation that I think we shy away from sometimes because of uncertainty, and instead perhaps we should embrace the uncertainty that is there. And here's what I mean. When we talk about innovation, we often think that means being creative, and a lot of people are creative, and that's great and that's awesome. But with that creativity comes risk. Anytime you're trying something new, you have to recognize that it may not work. I mean, if you were certain that it would work, it wouldn't be a new idea. The only way you could be certain was because somebody had done it before. So when you're involved in innovation, embrace the idea that there will be failures and get people to accept that and be comfortable with that. So the first principle I think would be useful is the acceptance of risk. Now, one way that I've seen companies do this, one of the most interesting examples I ever saw was an insurance company in the US a few years ago, and they would give out a best failure of the quarter award. So this wasn't failure through negligence or incompetence. This was somebody tried an idea. It seemed like a good idea, but it didn't work. But at least they tried. And the idea was to encourage people, to show people that failure was okay, that failure was not something to be afraid of, but in fact, failure should be something to be embraced. And the idea was to get people more comfortable with that idea of failure. The second thing to consider, the second principle then, is that when failure occurs, you need to learn from it. And learning from it doesn't necessarily mean just one person, like whoever had the failure. It means identifying what went wrong and sharing those lessons with others, communicating those lessons to others. So in addition to embracing risk and embracing uncertainty, the second principle I would articulate would be learning from those events and sharing it, because then that will help minimize uncertainty in the future. So embrace uncertainty when you have to and be willing to accept that risk, but then minimize uncertainty in the future by having a structured learning process, not just a random chance kind of thing, but actually put some structure around your learning process. Those are two things that I think would be especially helpful for innovation. Okay, let's see. In being transparent, where do you draw the line between what information can be shared with employees or clients and what information needs to be restricted? Great question. And certainly when I was in the military, that was a very important question because we dealt a lot with classified information on a need-to-know basis. Here's what I would suggest. You are going to have information that you cannot share with your clients, and maybe you're not comfortable sharing it with your employees because it's so sensitive. In that case, what I would do is say to them, there are some things that I cannot share with you, but let me share with you what I can. And the idea behind that is to make them more comfortable that you're not hiding things from them, that you're not pretending that other things aren't happening. They are happening. You just aren't in a position to talk about them. And it's okay to let people know that. So, there certainly is some information you're not going to want to share. Throughout a merger and acquisition process, for example, you may want to share with your clients what you expect the ultimate company to look like and what services you expect to provide. You don't need to tell them why you entered into the merger, or any of the background or any of the internal business deliberations that led to that. But you should tell them what you expect the outcome to be so that they can be ready for it and be prepared for it. Okay. Personnel information. Don't share private information about individuals in the company. If somebody is let go, you don't need to explain why necessarily. So, you can keep personal information private. So that's where I think some of the lines should be drawn. But certainly it's okay to tell people there's other stuff I can't tell you. I would if I could, but I can't. And then they'll have more trust and confidence in you. Okay, we got time for one more question here. How can you present certainty convincingly when the situation is plagued with uncertainty? And Neil, you raise the current COVID-19 situation. And I should add, for anyone watching the replay later, we're recording this in March 26th of 2020. So we're in the midst of a pandemic right now. I would say one of the ways you can present certainty is not so much certainty in the situation, because you don't have control over that. You could be CEO of a company, but you don't control a pandemic. What you can do is let your people know that you're providing them with all of the information you have, good and bad. So, for example, if there's an incident that takes place in your office building, people are going to hear about it. It's going to be passed around by WhatsApp and WeChat and Telegram and every other, messaging platform out there. It's useful for you to get the information that you can and communicate that to your people. You may not have all the answers, and you cannot express exactly what's going to happen in the future, but at least let them know that you are following it as closely as you can. You're taking all the steps that you can, and give them the confidence in you by providing them the information that you can, okay, and being as upfront and straightforward as possible. All right, so that's all we've got time for today. We're at 45 minutes into the session, and I told you 45 minutes, and I do want to respect your time. I'm very happy that you were able to join us today. If you do have any follow-up questions, once again, you can respond to any of the emails that you've gotten about this webinar, and that will get back to me. You can visit our website, and there's a contact page there you can use to reach out to me. I'd be very happy to take any questions after this. And thank you also for your insights from the polls today, because that gives us an idea of what our next webinars may be. I'll send you an email. We'll send out an email letting you know when the next webinar is scheduled. It'll be in April sometime, and we'll let you know about that. So have a great day ahead. Best of luck to all of you in dealing with all the situations you're dealing with right now, and do let us know if we can help you out with that. Have a great day.